The way the mind works, the president of the Pima Chodron Foundation, Tim Olmsted, right? He says this isn't spirituality, this isn't Buddhism, this is how the mind works. If you learn anger, you see anger. If you learn, happiness, you see happiness. It's just as simple as that. So the sooner we can get to training people, the younger, the more I'm for it. And luckily I have this time to do what I can.
Sometimes it's about more than manifesting. You got to do the work.
Welcome to the show, Holly. I want to thank you for making it on the podcast. I know we've had crazy situations that have disconnected us, but we finally managed to connect, and I believe that everything happens at the time it's supposed to happen. So
that's right.
I want to welcome Holly to the podcast, the Keep It Uplifting podcast. This is episode 187 of the Keep It Uplifting podcast.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It has been a long journey, but as you said, divine timing on everything, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. So I want to get right into the weeds of it. As far as I read this book by Deepak Chopra, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Have you read this book?
Mm-hmm. I have not read that book. I've read a lot of books, but I've not read that book. So tell me about it.
So in the book, Deepak Chopra, or 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Let me be correct when I mention this title, but he mentions the law of Dharma, right? Which is the law of purpose. And in America, it seems that a lot of us don't know what our purpose is, right? Or before social media, we had more meaningful lives. What is your purpose now as opposed to what it was pre-pandemic?
Wow. Well, it's been an amazing journey. And actually, before the pandemic, one of the obviously major things that happened in this country was 9/11, right? And my journey really started then at 9/11. But what the pandemic did for me 20 years later was I made a vow right around the time of 9/11 at that very low point in the country. I was also at a very, very low point. I made a vow, give me another chance, life, God, Buddha, the universe, and I'll do better. So I spent 20 years on that vow. And during the pandemic, as I printed out a book proposal that I'd been working on, I still haven't published the book, which is fine. The book was a means to an end. I looked over and I could see this kind of path I'd been on, this very circuitous path in a very succinct and clear way. And it was in October maybe 18th of 2020. And so for me, that was the beginning of P.E.R.L.O.V.E, which is what I'm here to talk about today.
Okay. In your landing page, after digging through the formula, and on prior interviews that I've heard of yours, you spoke a lot about anxiety, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anxiety is the most common mental health disorder in the United States, actually, right before depression. What aspect of American living do you think gives so many people this mental health problem?
You mean just in America? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, obviously, social media is a big part of that, but what I've learned along the way is that we have so many thoughts a day that are processed below our level of awareness. I call it below the radar. That we create patterns and defaults based on things that most of our mind is negative based, as a negative bias. And so we create these perfect images of who we should be, yet we reject parts of ourselves. A lot of this, again, without our awareness. And so when those patterns aren't met, that anxiety flares up. When these patterns that we've actually created in our brain through all the neurons, creating a neural net of these patterns of exactly how we feel we should be to be okay, how society says we need to be okay. When those patterns aren't met, there's this, there's a reaction in our bodies, which is that anxiety. We've without awareness, we've created these kind of are markers for us that we have to meet. And when we don't meet those, we beat ourselves up about it, right? And without, again, really knowing what's going on.
So you think it's just purely subconscious expectations that kind of gives majority of Americans it was an overwhelming number in statistics,
Yeah,
anxiety.
yeah, yeah. Well, mind training matters. And I think we should be taught that in elementary school. In fact, I was just talking to someone the other day, and they really inspired me that to, when I get these practices to where I want them to be, to create a program that we could teach children in elementary school. Because mind training matters. And without that, you are at the whim of whatever childhood trauma that you've been in and whatever kind of decisions you made in that split moment to stay safe and whatever you've forgotten and kind of pushed away, but are creating from. And so, yeah, if you once you understand your patterns and you control your mind, you have that mind training. What regardless of what's happening on the outside, you're good to go. That you can control that. You can alleviate that anxiety on the inside. Absolutely.
Wow.
I believe the outside world is a creation of the inside. So absolutely, anxiety as well.
Yeah, that's talked about in the four agreements where we kind of create
Yes,
our external existence for ourselves. And that's in what every
absolutely.
self-improvement book you ever read, right? Like you create
That's
your
right.
reality. But
That is absolutely right.
in mind training of, cuz it's a lot of our subconscious thoughts are built from the beginning, right?
Right.
So when you talk about mind training, what do you mean exactly in mind training? Because some of the things are instilled in us by how can be mind trained as a youth outside of the home, but when I go home, there's a level of conditioning there that's happening. How do you?
There's absolutely a level of conditioning, and that's just a matter of growing the awareness of a nation, of the world, that this is important, that children need to be taught these things. But there's three levels of the mind, Freud's three levels. There's the conscious mind. The brain can take in 11 billion bits of information every second, but the conscious mind can only process 40 to 50 of those bits. Then there's the subconscious mind, which is the powerhouse, which is taking all the other bits, including all the thoughts we have. And then there's the unconscious mind, things that we can never recall, like when you were 2, when you fell and hit your nose or whatever, you can't ever recall that. But the subconscious mind is something that we can grow our awareness of it. We can become conscious of things in our subconscious mind. So the sooner somebody learns that, the more they can start to understand what's going on in their head, which is then what's going on in their world. So I always applaud when I talk to younger people who have got it going on and kind of understand that. But you're absolutely right. Without that kind of understanding, children that go home to these bad situations are lost. If there's not that kind of training, there's the way the mind works, and the president of the Pima Chodron Foundation, Tim Olmsted, right? He says this isn't spirituality, this isn't Buddhism, this is how the mind works, right? If you learn anger, you see anger. If you learn, happiness, you see happiness, and it's just as simple as that. So the sooner we can get to training people, the younger, the more I'm for it. And luckily, I have this time to do what I can.
So I wanted to ask you about that because 90% of adults, right, they were polled and they say there's a mental health crisis in the United States.
Hmm.
So what made you take it upon yourself to essentially take on a piece of the mission to heal the United States? And the reason I mention the United States is because we're here. I know that we have some
Right.
listeners abroad, but it's not that many. So I wanted to just try to direct it at just the core of where we live, right? Where we exist, right? You got to
Right.
help home before you can help the world, right?
Well, you talked about those telling those stories before we started recording. And to be honest, James, I did not start this for others.
Mm.
I had no idea. I mean, I knew of compassion and understanding, but at age 34, I built a world created on my patterns and defaults, hiding the unlovability and unworthiness and anxiety anxiety is huge for me that I grew up with. I built this perfect world. I had the perfect career, house, husband, family, right down to my pets, Alfredo and Fettuccine, you know. But at age 34, that all imploded. And I was at such a low point. I knew there had to be something better. And so like I said, I made this vow for myself, really, to find this better. And I got this second chance. And so I made with my karmic debt in tow, I went out to make good on that vow. And about 10 years into my journey, I realized I had something to say. Something's really gelling here, right? So I made two intentions back in my early 40s. The first was to retire from my profession as an architect before I turned 50. And the second was to have the time and space to write about what I had been learning. So as intentions go, and once I made that vow, James, everything, it was very difficult. It got me out of a mutually manipulative and controlling marriage into an 8-year battle for my children, to prevent my, I had to do everything I could back then, to prevent my alienation from them, my permanent alienation from them, which, thankfully I did. But in making that vow and keeping it, I tripped upon this amazing path. Like, if you don't even have to know how you're going to get somewhere, you just have to, believe it and, be on it and stay with it. I tripped upon this amazing path where things started showing up where I needed. Like, if I had a question, the very next thing I read was the answer. It wasn't the other way around. I didn't like read something and then have a question like, oh, I wonder what this is. And I would read it and I'm like, it blew me away. It still blows me away to this day. But in my early 40s, I realized something's gelling here. And as an architect, I've done hospital work across the country, internationally and nationally, and I'm good at putting big puzzles together. Right? So I retired 2 days before I turned 50, and in 2017, I sat down to write. And then, like I said, it wouldn't be until the COVID pandemic that these principles, this formula, just showed up one day. It was amazing. But something tells me, and this might sound kind of way a little bit out there, but something tells me that maybe in a previous life or something, I had gotten pretty far in this and I understood what was going on. And, I kind of went, yeah, nah, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to, I'm not going to bother. Right. So this time around, life's going to be like, okay, look, you're going to go through some hell and then you're going to want to do this. Okay. And that's exactly where I'm at. There's nothing that will stop me from doing this, from doing what I can. Nothing. There was nothing. It's my number one priority.
Yeah, I can see that. I've you're the people who have experienced your speaking or have connected with the formula has definitely they've definitely have had great things to say, and you seem like a person on a mission because coming out of you said a divorce, even a battle for your children, I can only imagine how someone would just be exhausted, forget defeated,
Oh my God.
right?
Yeah.
And
Single mom, full-time job, fighting for custody of my children. And I was alienated from my father. So I know the consequences of that. So even though I didn't have any self-worth, I didn't care about anyone else. I knew the consequences and I love my children, right? And that taught me so much. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
no,
you.
no, that was just my question was just how could you even see to do something different than what you were doing when you had all this in the way, right?
I,
Like
yeah,
there's so much traffic, and how do you see the exit? Is essentially what I'm
yeah,
saying.
good. That's a good question. But I was so lost and so miserable and so anxious every day that I knew there had to be something better. And like I said, it was a hard road. And a couple of times, even after that vow, I kind of went, forget about it. And then life, like, right again. Life is showing you in everything that you do, every day, and everything that you do, what you need to set yourself free, right? And so I I I, I was just, it actually helped me along the way, right? I needed help. I didn't have, I never really had a guru that I studied under. I did study Buddhism for 5 years or practice it and live in a Dharma house. But I had that, right? When I had nothing else, I had that. It actually kept me going. And I didn't know where I was going for the first 10 years. I just knew I wanted something different than stuck and lost and anxious and miserable.
And in studying Buddhism, is that your natural religion, or and we don't really talk about a lot about religion on this podcast, but number one religion in America is what, Christianity or something like that. So,
Hmm.
did you grow up Pentecostal or Catholic?
Yeah, I grew up Lutheran,
Okay.
and for a while my mother was an Ekist, which is a whole nother religion. And for a long time I was just spiritual. And then I practiced, I didn't start practicing Buddhism. I started meditation right at the beginning of my journey. That's a mind, body, spirit, right? The first thing I started was, just a little bit of meditation. And if you do one, the others follow along. But I didn't really start practice Buddhism until 2014. I really got into it when these amazing teachers and things showed up. But actually, I'm not a Buddhist anymore. I don't practice Buddhism anymore. But it wasn't just Buddhism, James. Along the way, there was neuroscience, psychology, and other spirituality. And what I loved about it all, and when it all kind of came together, what amazed me is that they all pointed back to a few simple truths. Everything pointed back to. And I remember the day I was looking at this book from. It was a book from the 1980s that. Do you remember the guy who wrote "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff"? Dr.
Uh,
Richard Carlson.
Actually, yes, I do. I have it.
Yes, yes. Well,
it's a
yeah. Well, right.
it's a small book too.
Yes, it is. And right before that, he had written a book called "You Can Be Happy No Matter What." Right. And I read it 10 years into my journey. And then I read it recently. And then at the very beginning of the book, there's a teeny little thing that says, hey, by the way, these first 4 principles of the 5 are from this other book from the 1980s called, and this is a terrible title, Sanity, Insanity, and Common Sense, a breakthrough approach to happiness. And when I got that book and I started looking at it, and it started to bring in all the same things that I'd been learning in Buddhism and spirituality and psychology, it just blew me away. So my gift is clarity, and to be able to see those few simple truths was something it's like I'm hoping to share this with as many people as I can. It was just amazing that from so many different modalities, these same kind of messages kept coming through from ancient, millennial old wisdom to modern day teachings. The same kind of truths kept coming up for me.
I love that it all just came to one place, right? When we were talking about
Yeah.
the commonalities amongst all of these self improvement or philosophy,
Right.
spirituality type of books. And I have a quote
Right.
about happiness here from Deepak Chopra.
Uh-huh.
I I just revisited because on your page I saw Dharma, and I was like, oh, I did a video and I read that book. And so this quote actually goes perfect. As you were speaking about happiness, it says the purpose of life is the expansion of happiness. What do you say to that?
Yeah. It is the expansion of happiness. But, one of the things that people have said is, happiness was back in the 80s, right? With, that people want more than just happiness. And so my thing is defining what is happiness, right? And to me, it's to a lot of people, happiness is if I just get that job, or if this person just likes me, or if I had a little bit more money. But to me, happiness is well-being, right? And well-being comes through growing your awareness, um, through your mind training, and being able to be balanced regardless of what's going on the outside. And so, in that expansion of happiness, is where really the evolution of consciousness takes place. So, I absolutely believe that.
What or when did you craft the Perlo formula, or what made you want to share the Perlo formula? What is that in itself?
What is the formula? Well, like I said, I'd been on this long, long journey, and I looked over, and I'd written a book, and every 3 chapters or so, I something called a waking monologue, right? Do you see what I see? What is your emotional age? And when I looked over at the book, each one of those waking monologues had a clear practice. It was, a lot of it is your wisdom coming through, right? And so when it just showed up, I had no idea it was going to show up like that. I just knew that I wanted to share what I had been learning. And what P.E.R.L.O.V.E does is package it in a way that I can hand it to people, and they can say, okay, I see it. And the wonderful thing about it is that they don't have to take my word for any one of the practices, because again, I'm an architect who puts big, it takes 2 million decisions to put a set of drawings together, right? So I just put the puzzle together. Every one of the practices is backed by gurus and teachers and different modalities and things I've read and learned. And I feel like if I can help people in their busy lives, right? To realize that you don't have to be a monk or a nun. You don't have to, meditate in a cave for 12 years or whatever, right? You can be like I was, 34, single, full-time job, lost, right? And you can find your way. And all you have to do is believe there is a way. And P.E.R.L.O.V.E is definitely one of those ways. But as I said, many teachings point back to the fact that we're much more than what I call our T.E.F, our thoughts, emotions, and feelings.
And what does P.E.R.L.O.V.E stand for?
So it's in two parts. The pledge, evaluate, recognize is the more cerebral part of the formula, where we first train the mind. We first pledge to watch our minds, grow our awareness, evaluate our patterns and defaults that operate below our level of awareness, and then we recognize them as they come up in our daily lives. These three simple practices form the basis for a mental transformation, and are the three practices that I found that are kind of been the missing link to there. There are so many teachings in love, right? So love is the more spiritual part of the practices. So when you recognize these patterns as they come up in your daily life, creating space between you and your thoughts, emotions, and feelings, you start to your wisdom starts to come through in that space. You locate that calm space within your mind, and that's what L then is. Locate. With that location, with that space that when you meditate on it as an object of meditation, you understand that it has a little bit more movement than you might expect. It maybe is beyond your body, the limits of this body and mind. You drop into your heart and you open your heart, because that's where it says our true nature is. Then you vest or invest in what you find there, the flow that comes from an open heart. And finally, in the second E, you expand beyond your conditioned limits. So each practice is very, very clear and very concise. But of course, these things take time, right? If you think about it, we all have between 6,000 and 70,000 thoughts a day. And without our awareness, we've been creating patterns for years and years and years. And it's what P.E.R.L.O.V.E is all about, is growing your awareness and changing those patterns, right? Changing those patterns, creating that awareness, which is ultimately your true nature that you can rest in, right? And find peace in, but also see those patterns from a distance and change them and then in time live those changes.
And I see that you mentioned just to start 6 minutes a day. Why?
Yeah.
How
Yep.
did you arrive at 6 minutes, and what was the thought process behind that?
There's a story of a monk in one of my teaching, in one of the Buddhist teachings that I was at. I studied under the New Kadampa tradition, Geshe Kelsang Gyatso Rinpoche. And the story was that there's a monk who was busy building a temple. And as he got busy with construction delays and cost overruns, he realized he didn't have time for his practice. And so he went to his guru and he said, look, with all of this going on, I don't have time for my practice. And the guru said to him, that's not a problem. All you need is 6 minutes a day. And that really resonated with me, because a lot of people don't have a lot of time, right? And meditation, people think they need to sit there for 20 minutes or an hour. Meditation is just a tool, right? And meditation in Tibetan, Gom, actually means to become familiar with, right? And I didn't even know this for years. Like, how did I not know this? Right. So, what we're doing with 1 minute 6 times a day is we start with 1 minute 6 times a day, but eventually we want to make this a 24/7 thing. And how do you do that? By creating the habit. We are creating a habit of growing our awareness, of watching our mind. So if you, for 3 weeks, if for 1 minute, 6 times a day, you just stop, take a deep breath, and just watch what's going on. You're not judging, you're not pushing it away. If you do that 1 minute, 6 times a day, this will start to happen automatically, right? That's what habits are. And eventually, you will have created the habit of watching your mind. And so, in time, you won't have to do the 1 minute, 6 times a day. You will have a habit of watching your mind and understanding, oh, that's a thought in my mind, right? That's not me. That's a thought in my mind. And so it starts there, 1 minute, 6 times a day. And from there, when you grow the awareness, you already are starting to grow your wisdom, right?
But what do you say to the person who doesn't believe in Buddhism?
It's not all
Okay.
Buddhism, right? It's just how the mind works, right? Like Tim Olmsted said. In fact, there's a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? Do you know that movie?
No, I'm not familiar, but I'll look it
Okay, it came out in
up.
2004. So it came out in 2004, and it talks a lot about the mind and how these thoughts work. Thoughts that fire together, wire together, creating long-term relationships, making whatever we think about long-term very solid and very real. It's a documentary movie mix. It's got Marlene Matlin in it,
Mhm.
and they talk about how anything we think about makes it anything we think about consistently, consciously, unconsciously, seem very solid and very real. So those people that if you don't understand, it's because you're enmeshed in all those thoughts, emotions, and feelings, right? You just have to believe there's something better. And what I love about the practices and about these simple truths is that you don't have to be a Buddhist, you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to be, you don't have to be in therapy, you can just be a person, and you can just do this. And when you understand how the mind works, you will know what you need to do to create that change you want to be.
For this, what if I'm listening and I'm curious, is there a trial period, or is it a full commitment? How does that work if I reach out to you and contact you?
Well, what you do is, again, I'm all about getting these practices out there. And so if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, you'll be sent a link to a free 1 hour class that goes through each one of these practices for an hour. And it talks about the gurus and teachings behind them, right? Completely free. And then, of course, you'll get my newsletter once a month where I give insights on the practices, also free. And I would tell someone, it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't take a commitment to sign up for anything besides the newsletter. Growing my email list is going to help get these practices out there. Um, but I would tell them this: if you want to learn something, if you want to change something, if you want to create something new in your life, you must do it over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? It takes 3 times. Listen to this podcast 3 times, right? To even remember it, 8 times to let it sink in, and 21 days to make it a habit. And if you think about it, all these anxious thoughts that we do over and over and over again, that sends all the anxious chemicals down to our body, right? We have all of that. That's going to resist change when we go to change, right? So you must do something. If you're interested in these practices, get the video, the link, and watch it over and over and over again. Long before, even 10 years into my journey, even before my Buddhist study, I was given a CD by a great therapist I had from John Kabat-Zinn. And even before my Buddhist study, I knew how important it was to listen to something over and over and over and over again. And I did. I listened to it over and over and over again, because what happens then is that it starts to play in your head, right? Just like all those anxious thoughts start to play in your head, all of those positive, helpful things start to play in your head, which is exactly what helped me along the way. Because then when something else that's similar to that comes along, you haven't forgotten this podcast that you listened to in September of 2023 and never listened to again, right? You know it, and you're like, oh wait, that's it, that's the same thing, and you start to connect these things together. So you can get a long way in P.E.R.L.O.V.E without, without spending a dime. It's, it's all out there for you. And then the teachings that I reference in my class, go look at those books, read those books.
That's absolutely amazing. I think that we kind of just breezed over the point that you were an architect. You were at the top of an industry, making
Yep.
decisions and making a lot of or good money. I don't want to say a lot of money,
Decent money, decent
but
money,
you were
decent money.
you had a great career. You didn't have to do
Mm.
this, and the fact
Right.
that you decided at a certain point that you were going to retire before the retirement age, which is moving up to 70, right? So you
Yeah.
retired 30 years in advance almost, you know? I just think that's absolutely amazing, and that's a testament to the formula itself, right? And
Yeah.
it's a body of work, right? That you actually put in the work, you put in the time to create something that I believe that my listeners and anybody who's watching this should definitely sign up for.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for mentioning that, James. I do appreciate that. And I worked at a large firm. I was an associate principal, set to be the managing principal in San Francisco. I worked in Egypt, in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, worked for Stanford, worked in New York. So yeah, yeah. But I wanted to do this, right? I wanted to. I mean, I loved my career, but it was like been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and I knew I could do more help, more work here, and it's much more peaceful. Architecture can be very adversarial, right? I mean, you do a set of drawings, contractors bid on it, and then it's their job to find your mistakes, and then to get change orders, and So I did want to do this. I'm not going to kid myself, but yeah, I did. I did leave a major career, and the beautiful thing was, and for anyone out there listening, is that you can be a single parent, and you can be in your career, and you can find train your mind at the same time. In fact, in invest in V, I say again that everything that happens in your life, every person, place, or thing, every event is showing you what you need to set yourself free. When I moved, I'm from South Dakota originally, the Black Hills of South Dakota, Mount Rushmore. Ooh. But I moved to Minneapolis to grow my career and my spiritual growth. I moved to the greater New York City area to do the same. I over to San Francisco to live in a Dharma house. And, you know, each time I did that, um, change is scary, right? But the more you change and the more you practice change, anything you practice is going to become more familiar to you. And, you can go as far as you want to go. Two of the most important words I learned during my Buddhist study were familiarity and habituation. Right? If we're not familiar with change, it's scary to us, right? If our habit is anxiety, that's what we're going to do. But you can change. You can turn that around.
I think that is well said. A question that I always ask my guest is what's I always say what's next, but what's the most meaningful next step for you?
I was so selfish when I was stuck and lost and self-absorbed. I say, and I was forced to think about others when I had to, kind of fight for my children and to prevent my alienation from them. And so really I've come to the point where this me, right, is whatever happens to this me is fine. But the biggest thing I'd like to do before this expires is to, is to share this at whatever degree I can, you know. I'm speaking at a mindfulness expo, woohoo, in Anaheim, California in 3 weeks. So if any of your listeners are in California, you should attend this mindfulness expo at the convention center. I'm speaking at 2 o'clock. I'm hoping to do a TEDx talk eventually, but just the more clarity I can get out there. One of the things I've learned when you listen to this, when you rest in this awareness that you grow, is that the wisdom comes through. You don't have to figure out how to get there, things show up, right? Like you showing up in my, this podcast, this opportunity to speak to whoever's listening out there showed up, right? I've gotten to, because of this 20-year journey and how everything has shown up, I've grown my trust, and this will be whatever it's meant to be. And it will get to whoever is ready to hear it.
Well, I want to thank you. Is there anywhere that, other than the links that I'm going to provide, backlinks that people can reach you, any emails or other
Yeah.
social media?
Yep. I don't know what what I gave you for the links. Again, it's been a while since we scheduled this, but if you have any questions, you can email me at holly@P.E.R.L.O.V.E.formula.com. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm at Holly, P.E.R.L.O.V.E, Holly Mcneill is my handle. So if you type in on Instagram, if you type in P.E.R.L.O.V.E, at P.E.R.L.O.V.E, P.E.R.L.O.V.E, I'll come up. On Facebook as well. And like I said, I'm hoping I'll be speaking in Anaheim. I'm hoping I'm hoping to be speaking more, and I don't know. I'm hoping people will find me along the way. They will find the practices. Yeah, if that's what will help them find their way home.
Well, I truly want to thank you for coming on the show. I believe that your story is absolutely amazing. We didn't even dig into the fight, the real fight for your kids. That was a long backstory. I recommend anyone read it. Go to PERLOVEFormula.com, and then the backstory is on the site as well. The formula is on the site, but definitely sign up so that you can get the full experience. And Holly is a very, very welcoming person, and she's persistent. We corresponded for a while, so I'm glad that we
Good.
were able to make this happen. I want to thank you again just for coming on the show, and for everyone that's listening, be sure to keep it uplifting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Make sure to like, comment, share, and most importantly, keep it uplifting.
Take it up, listen.